Enjoy with your headphones for a better listening experience.
Please watch till the end of the video to have the most scariest part of the story.
What are your personal camping horror stories? My parents and I got lost in Grand Gulch for 2 days. On the tail end of a 5-day trip we were exiting the canyon. The route seemed a lot more difficult than we anticipated. We knew there would be a faint trail, if any, but once we crested the rim we found out we were way off course. Knowing the general direction we needed to head, we started walking and conserving water as much as we could, having left the multitude of water pockets in the canyon below us. Slept that night under a pinyon pine and shared our last couple power bars, hoping to find some source of water the next day in the open desert. After a few miles the next morning we finally came upon a faint road that became more pronounced as we went on. This road brought some good feelings, knowing we stashed a shuttle bike for someone to ride the last 8 or so miles to the van. Finally got to the bike cache and my stepdad hopped on as a rainstorm started rolling in. After half an hour or so it turned to full downpour, which was great because we were thirsty badly. After walking what felt like an eternity and wondering where our ride was, we walked upon the primitive empty, other than our van, parking lot. We see my stepdad tearing through it trying to get the thing started. A dead battery. He ended up riding through thick mud another 6 miles to the highway to try to flag someone down. Ended up catching the eye of a ranger out patrolling who got us a tow and took us into Blanding, Utah while we got that bastard of a van running again. That felt like a lot for 11-years-old me.
My husband and I recently went up north in MI, a place we'd never camped that was right near Lake Huron. A lady let us use her campsite as it had a bathroom in the shed and access to outlets. The first night we stayed, she let us know something had been eating her bird feed. She figured it was a squirrel, raccoon, etc. Well, that night had me questioning if it wasn't a larger forest animal, a bear or wolf. At about 3 or 4 a.m. I woke up to pee. As I walked to the shed/bathroom, I noticed it was unusually quiet but didn't fully grasp how quiet until after I was back on the blow-up mattress, nearly back asleep. Right before drifting off, I heard something large attack something small. If you've ever heard a large dog get hold of a smaller animal, you know what I mean. Deep and guttural, followed by yelping. After that, a lot of scraping and wrestling noises, then 3 seconds of near-deafening silence. At this point I was no longer groggy. I was wide awake, listening to my husband breathe, knowing any noise was a bad idea. I didn't move for what felt like 20 minutes, listening to whatever was outside of our tent devouring the bird feed/corn. After the movement and breathing stopped, my bladder was already full again. I didn't leave the tent for over an hour. When we woke up in the morning, I told my husband what I'd heard. The corn and bird feed containers were on the ground, empty. Could have been a raccoon. Could have been a possum. I sure as hell was praying it wasn't anything bigger.
My fiancé and I were on a camping trip last summer in Arkansas, casually grilling some dinner when we heard someone loudly yelling for help. I ran a few campsites over to find a, clearly drunk, man standing in a pool his own blood. Apparently he had dropped his knife and nicked an artery in his ankle, which was spurting blood like a fountain. My fiancé was not far behind me and helped get it wrapped up and elevated while I ran back for my phone to call for an ambulance, only to find out I had no cell service. I knew there was a hospital roughly 20 miles away, so I made a judgment call and loaded the man up into his truck and took off. Now is a good time to mention that blood makes me super squeamish, and I think pure adrenaline is the only thing that kept me from passing out at the wheel. I made it to the hospital in 12 minutes just as he started slurring his speech and hinting at losing consciousness. I still remember the pool of blood spilling out of the door off the floor mat as they took him inside. My fiancé picked me up from the hospital and we headed back. We ended up having to watch his dog and tried our best to have a normal evening. The man showed back up around 10:30 p.m. with 18 stitches. The doctor had told him if we hadn't been there or we had waited for an ambulance he would have bled out and died. Horrifying situation, but we saved a man's life.
I did a solo camping trip knowing there was a storm coming. I didn't think it'd be bad and it meant there wouldn't be anyone else out. Just me and my dog without another soul for miles. I hadn't been there before and I ended up losing cell reception a few miles before the campground. I was expecting some light showers and maybe some wind but nothing to worry about. Well, the wind picked up big time and I started getting paranoid that a tree would get knocked down over the road and I'd get stuck. I loaded up and drove home. About 2 miles from the campground a tree did fall over, but didn't block the road completely. I was able to carefully maneuver around it. I felt like an idiot for going out there.
Went camping up at Rock Island, Wisconsin over the summer. For folks who haven't been there, you have to take a ferry off of Door County to Washington Island and then a second boat to Rock Island. Totally primitive, remote and has a lot of history. The island has 3 separate cemeteries and building remains from early settlers. It was a perfect clear night, so Hubs and I wanted to go stargazing at a field about a quarter miles from our campsite. To get there you had to pass by one of the cemeteries. Just as we did, maybe halfway to the field, a thick fog starts rolling in. We decide to keep going when I noticed a set of glowing eyes in the distance. I start freaking out and get husband to shine his flashlight over in that direction. Suddenly 3 to 4 more sets of eyes appear just as the fog really starts to thicken. Immediately started sprinting back to camp after scared ourselves. Turns out the island is home to a whole heck of a lot of foxes who like to wander near the campsites at night, who all decided to visit as we were making our way out.
Took my 3 and 5-year-olds camping. My husband was going to meet us there after he got off work. It was about an hour from our house, which was after their bedtime, so I set the tent up by myself. It was a huge 15-year-old tent not made to be set up by just one person. What would have taken the 2 of you's 10 minutes took me about an hour by myself, not including the time spent running around after the kids. Got the camp all set up and got the kids to bed. He shows up, we go to sleep, and we wake up 3 or 4 hours later to both children projectile vomiting all over us and them in the tent. I cleaned us up and packed them straight into the car. My husband cleaned up and packed the campsite, and we headed home. They vomited all over themselves and their car seats tow home. We didn't camp for a few years after that. Husband and older children and I were camping in southern Colorado in the summer of 2020. This was a multi-state loop over close to 2 weeks, and our last site out of 4. Before dawn on our first night, in the Durango area in a federal campground, we both woke up incompletely because someone was walking around outside our tent with a flashlight. We were both acutely aware that someone was outside our tent, but we both also perceived other things were happening, and realized it wasn't the time to bolt up and run outside with a gun. We discussed this later that morning and we both were conscious but perceived intuitively we should not react to what was happening and so did not. It was the local sheriff walking around within inches of our tent, and shining a flashlight into our tent. The sheriff didn't address us, wake us up, or ask any questions. Late the night before, as we were going to sleep after pitching camp after dark, we heard loud screaming and arguing. My husband just assumed it was a party of drunken people, and I remember him telling me to go to bed with the girls and not to worry. It was a violent domestic dispute in a campsite several parcels over from us, and by the time it was pre-dawn the sheriff had been called. The instigator alleged, parked his truck 20 feet from our campsite in the middle of the night and fled. The armed sheriff had been looking for him when he walked around our tent and shined his flashlight into our tent. Had either my husband or I decided we were in mortal danger and rushed outside with a weapon, we would have had a bad situation.
I have too. My wife and I hiked and camped backcountry in Glacier NP a few years ago. 12 miles in. No cell signal. Tent site locations were strictly set. You have to camp exactly where your permit says. Ours was next to 2 tall dead trees. Besides that, totally open landscape, bushes, rocks, other sparse tall dead trees. At 4 a.m., a huge thunderstorm rolled in. Crazy wind, rain and lightning. Nowhere to run and hide. Pitch black darkness besides bright flashes of light. I was scared to death for the entirety of the storm, anticipating the trees crashing down on our tent. In the end, we made it out. 2012, Shenandoah NP Backcountry. I was camping solo in a hammock with a fly over top. The guy lines from the fly stretched out about 10 feet into the surrounding woods. Around midnight I heard some rustling in the woods, and by dim moonlight I saw 2 black bears appear. They approached my camp casually, rooting for food in the leaves and rocks. Eventually they were at the 10-foot mark. I could hear them breathing. They flipped over several large rocks around the perimeter, looking for grubs or whatever. My biggest fear was that one of them would accidentally stumble into and become entangled in the thin guy lines of the fly, get angry and confused and flip out. I laid awake from midnight, 2 am with a Fox 40 whistle in my mouth and a 3-inch foldable pocket knife ready to defend my life. In the end, they wandered off. Ultimately, I consider these both to be fantastic memories, although at the time I experienced severe mental discomfort. I worried about bears for many years after the Shenandoah incident, but eventually got over it, and now I sleep like a log whenever I camp, regardless of the surroundings or animal species present. Took my kids camping and winded up in one of the small cabins near Big Meadow for the second night since the animal nightlife activities had my boys in tears. Night 1 in tent. First morning waking up in cabin, the boys were gone. Found them at base of a tree pointing at 2 cubs up high. That's terrifying and the scariest thing I've ever expected camping, worse than any weird stuff. Waiting for my 7 and 12-year-old to be attacked while I tried to quietly wrangle them away from the tree before Mama Bear came for them. They were taught better. But when other adults are there and taking pictures of baby bears in a tree with their own children, my kids assumed it was safe, and their mom was just overprotective. Glad a park ranger later explained to my kids why people and animals don't mix, for the safety of both. Especially hitting hard was the guys who beat a deer to death with a bat who they baited in to feed by hand. This was a lesson we talk about to their kids all these years later. People are the things to be most afraid of. School camping trip at Shenandoah maybe 50 years ago. I was real surprised when I saw the trash can that they basically put their foot through. The giant can of fruit cocktail fared better as it wasn't punctured, it was only sporting actual claw/teeth marks. A group of us slept on the bus that next night. We got a show, too. The bears wandered into the next camp over, caused pandemonium, campers came hauling out of the site, men running into the women's room, women into the men's room. We heard someone ask if so-and-so was with them, they weren't. Bear lumbers out of the site. Crazy to watch. I was on the Appalachian Trail in 2015 hiking, and one night a couple put the boots to me trying to steal my pack, but I zip-tied it to a tree that made them more mad. I got a good beating which ended my hike, but I stabbed one of them in the thigh and one in the top of the foot. I don't usually go off trail, but I did that night and hid out till morning and came across someone with a sat phone and got picked up. The couple got picked up at the local hospital with a lot of other people's gear in their car. Me, my wife, 3 kids in Franconia Notch, New Hampshire. We spent the week at a campground visiting the basin and all kinds of cool spots, hiking Ridge Trail etc. Second night we got back late from hiking, ate and cleaned dishes and was putting everything in the car, and a big black bear shows up and gets close enough that I could have touched his nose. I banged a big metal spoon on a pot right in his face. I thought he would either run or kill me. Luckily, he ran, but came right back. I did it again and followed him with it. That is the second scariest thing from the trip. Number 1 goes to the last night we were there. It was 4th of July, hot and sunny all day. We watched fireworks in a nearby town and came back to camp. Around midnight a storm came in so strong that rain was getting under the fly, so I went out with my son to put a tarp over the tent. Large tree branches were coming off and rolling through the campground, and very tall trees were bending low to the ground. I watched people abandon their tents and drive off, and their tents just blew away into the trees. I had no choice but to wait it out since I live 14 hours away in PA, and didn't want to leave my stuff behind. By morning telephone poles were down and the place was a mess. I got no sleep all day and all night, waited for certain death, and then attempted to drive home 14 hours. I made it to a farm in Vermont and took a nap while everyone else visited the farm store. It's a great memory but scary at the time. When I was about 13, I was camping with family, and as I was sleeping, I woke up in the middle of the night and was just staring at the fire. As I was staring at the fire, I saw a man, or a figure of a man, walk up to the fire, remove a burning log from the fire, put it on his shoulder and walk away until he disappeared, and the fiery log with him. Till this day, I don't understand what happened. I was terrified but couldn't scream. And when we all woke up, I looked around the fire, and saw some cans of gas, and lighter fluid rather close by. And I can't help but to wonder if that figure was some kind of otherworldly entity, who may have saved our lives by removing the log, because had the fire stayed the size it was, it would have caused a huge fire with the slightest change in the wind. I went on a week-long canoe trip, fully loaded canoe in an extremely isolated area. There were multiple portages, so we had a metal rolling cart strapped in the middle of the canoe on top of everything. Enter a large lake, rock cliff face all along the one side with no place to land. Then a thunder and lightning storm comes up fast and the only thing on the lake is us in our canoe with a big metal cart in the middle, on the side of the lake with the rock face. The wind kicks up hard and there's swells high enough to get into the boat, between the wind and swells seriously limiting our ability to get off the lake fast. Somehow managed to get off the lake without getting hit by lightning, not sure how, and with a few inches of water in the canoe. Admittedly, it was pretty scary. A buddy and I were camping in backwoods Idaho mountains pretty far from everyone in the middle of the week. Nearest town is like 600 people an hour away. We got camp set up around 7 and we get a fire going to cook hot dogs. We're just chilling around the fire. When it gets dark we're snacking on like Cheetos and stuff. As we talk we heard like branches up the mountain from us cracking. Like something stepping on bushes and stuff. We stop talking and the noises stop. We're a little unnerved, but we brought guns to go shooting the next day and we've got a pretty big fire going, so we start talking again. The rustling gets closer, like something or someone is moving down the mountain. We stop talking and the noises stop again. This happens like 2x more. We talk, something or someone moves closer. We stop, the noises stop. Finally, when whatever or whoever it was is like 200 feet away in the dark, I grabbed my rifle out of the truck and put a shot into the air. Whatever it was hauls ass up the mountainside in pitch black. Like we're talking like 400 feet in 30 seconds. I don't think it was like an elk or bear or cattle, it was super eerie. It knew to stop when we stopped talking. But I don't think it could have been a person, it moved way too quickly up the hill in dense brush in pitch black. We've not gone back there since. Drove out to Jumbo Rocks, Joshua Tree, midweek a few years back as I had done many years prior for season opening. Got up early, made the drive. Got there and the site was absolutely overflowing. I ran into a ranger that told me they were no longer first come first serve, and had moved to online booking. All of Joshua Tree was booked solid because of it. Ended up camping on BLM land. Which was still a great time because I was prepared, but yeah, was bummed not to visit my traditional site. Online booking has kind of ruined the feel of a lot of sites. People book them up and even resell their bookings. Ugh, I feel this. I'm in Wisconsin and our state park system is great. Until a few years ago almost every park had at least a few walk-up sites, aka first come first served. There are a couple along the same freeway an hour or so from my city, so many a Friday after work I'd be driving in that direction and periodically calling the park offices to see if they still had sites open so I could decide which park I could make it to and still get a site. It's now reservation only and now everything gets booked up way in advance, yet every weekend I go I see multiple sites empty. People don't even bother to cancel because it's around $20 per night. It's infuriating. And now I'm worried because I haven't booked for the season yet and I probably really need to like today, and who even knows what's left even though it's March. Not exactly camping, but when I was 15 we lived on a 5-acre property outside of a small town, surrounded by woods that I regularly explored during the day. I got into a fight with my parents and ran out of the house, hiding behind a hill in the backyard until I saw them get into the vehicle and leave. I then entered the house, went to my room, grabbed a duffel bag that I was storing supplies in under my bed, added my pillow and blanket and left again, grabbing my bike. I then walked into the woods through my usual path at the back of the property. I went to my usual place, an old house, well, the remnants of a basement to what was once a house. Supposedly of a family of cannibals who had killed a bunch of people in the area, and were burned alive when they were caught, and then their house was torn down. I set to work turning the large circle hole, about 5 feet deep, lined with bricks, into my shelter. I didn't complete the roof, but figured I would get to that the next day. I didn't build a fire. I grabbed my blanket and pillow to lie down shortly after dark. Just as I'm about to fall asleep I hear a twig snap, and promptly sit up. I calmed myself down, assuring myself that animals step on branches and stuff too, and I was overreacting. Just as I'm about to drift off again I hear someone ringing a bell. I sat up, threw my pillow and blanket in my bag, and walked out of the woods, leaving my bike behind. This time I went out towards the highway, which was a considerably faster way to exit the woods. Parked by the barrier were 3 cars, adding confirmation that humans were in the woods, for an unknown reason. I walked quickly down the highway to our house, and went inside to find we had visitors. Technically they were there because they were helping my parents look all over town for me. Lol. No one thought to check the woods. I put my bag down while I found out the details of the search and received my parents' lectures for scaring them, blah blah. I was sent to bed, and had to come back down to get my pillow and blanket. It was then that everyone paid attention to my bag. The main guy who had helped them even looked in and was surprised by how prepared I was to live in the woods. I had dishes, pans, a hatchet and shovel, along with spare clothes and other random stuff I don't recall. I never entered those woods after dark again. Found out shortly after the ghost story attached to the remnants of the house mentioned earlier. I never admitted that was my special place in the woods. Most terrified I've ever been. Chute Wilderness, NW, Georgia. Warm, clear, quiet summer night a few years ago. Dead asleep, middle of the night in the tent with wife, 2 young kiddos, and Popper. Jared awake by the boom of a large pine tree crashing through other trees and hitting the ground about 15 foot from the tent. Then, for a few seconds, all we could hear was the cracking of the trunks and branches of the trees the first one fell through as they began to fall also. We were all shrieking, no way we could all get out fast enough. The other trees landed in a pile on either side of the first. Not a single twig hit the tent. Weird. My wife and I planned a week of camping over our anniversary. We got to the campsite on Saturday afternoon, and they had a sign on the door warning that a bear was seen in the campground. Okay, be smart, put food away, etc., no problem. Turns out the bear was showing up every 12 hours like clockwork, and walking directly into our campsite. Why they didn't move us, I don't know, there were other sites available. First night, we slept in the car. Second night they hadn't seen the bear for a full day, but the park manager made some stupid comments, and so we slept in the car again. Tuesday, our anniversary, it started raining. We went and bummed around in the car because we figured one day of rain wasn't so bad. We ended up eating at a hotel restaurant because we weren't going to be grilling up the steak we brought in the pouring rain. Wednesday I woke up early with a stabbing pain in my toe. I stumbled through the rain to the car, I figured I'd read on my phone. Well, I check my phone and I have a voicemail. My stepmother called late the previous night to tell me she took my dad to the hospital because his back pain was horrible, and they think he has cancer. My toe was still hurting, so we went to urgent care where I was treated for an infection. We decided since I couldn't walk, and it was going to continue raining through the rest of our trip, that we would just bail out and go home early. The toe continued to hurt for 3 days, and was a delight while driving home. Went to Thibodaux, Louisiana to archery hunt with 4 of my friends. As I was cooking the first meal on the first evening, one of my friends lay down in the tent and got bit by a brown recluse spider. It is a long way to the hospital. We made it in time to save his life, but the doctor said he didn't have much longer to live without medical attention. We all spent several $100s apiece preparing for this trip and were on vacation to do it, had been planning it for 2 years, so it was kind of a nightmare, but at least he lived through it. I was backpacking with my wife and a friend in the Bighorns of Wyoming. We're probably 8 miles back there at some little lake with no one else around for miles. Pretty rugged, pretty remote. We turn in for the night and around first light I'm awoken by an incredibly loud noise. It absolutely sounds like someone is driving a truck through the forest at 40 miles per hour. Obviously this is impossible, so I have no idea what it could be, which is a pretty terrifying feeling when you're out there like that. So it goes quiet and I just stay hunkered down for another half. I finally got up to look around, and what do I discover but moose in the lake. A cow and her calf knee-deep smack in the middle. I put it together that the two were probably just casually strolling through the brush to take their morning swim, but the absolute quiet of the mountain morning made everything seem so much louder than it actually was. So we were hugely relieved and had a fantastic view while eating out breakfast. Oh geez. There are lots of situations where it snowed or was super cold or small accidents. But one stands out that took me a while to deal with and was fairly recent. I was visiting my family and decided to bring my gear to go camping with my dad and youngest brother. We had never been with just the 3 of us as adults. My dad was in declining health at this point in time and was going to need a transplant soon, so we stayed close and went car camping nearby in the mountains. It was a beautiful spot and it ended up being a super nice time. Very chill. Good food. Fun conversation around the fire. We woke up in the morning and started making coffee and breakfast, and my dad went to pee. He was pretty weak and we watched him basically just collapse and fall forward, face first, down an embankment of boulders into a wash or gully or whatever you call it. We jumped up and ran to him. His nose looked broken. His face sliced, the top of his hand had delved due to his thin skin. He was concussed but mostly okay. I went into overdrive. Grabbed a tarp from under a tent and threw it over the seat of my brother's car. We washed off what dirt we could from my dad and set up to take him down the mountain to the hospital, which wasn't terribly far. I stayed behind to clean up camp and process aging family and life circumstances changing, and then it gets worse. The doctor was pretty skeptical of his injuries, tested his back thinking he might be drunk in spite of the fact he had been going through treatment for liver disease, and he was right. Something like 0.2% at 7 is. Basically my dad had been suffering from a pretty bad depression from being so sick, so he had decided to just go the whole way. From what I understand, the drinking wasn't what triggered the disease, but definitely was exacerbated by it. It was rough. In ways that I still don't fully comprehend. The good news is that it was a big wake-up call, I think, even for him. So he told a lot of people in his community. Stopped drinking. Ended up getting a transplant. We went winter camping last month now that he has been recovering, mostly to just have another experience that wasn't so traumatic. It was nice, though I will still say that one trip was one of the top 5 for hardest days of my life. In college, I went camping and hunting with a girlfriend on an island where my family has a very tiny plot of unusable land. The island borders the Ship Channel in coastal Louisiana about 5 miles from the Gulf. This place is relatively new. But I've scouted it before. We get to the spot and I have to pull my boat across about 60 yards worth of 4-inch water over a sandy bottom to get close to the shoreline. I then bury a big 4-foot aluminium rod as far as I can get it into the sand with my bow rope on it. Boat's tied up, girlfriend is excited, we bushwhack our way to somewhat of a sandy clearing on a hill next to a small bluff where the boat is staked and tied below. First issue, no mosquito repellent and they were awful. Whatever, we pick up and head into the thickets being careful because there were signs of massive hogs out there. We find a spot, set up, and start hunting. Aside from the mosquitoes we didn't see anything but a really pretty sunset. I didn't have a flashlight, we ended up getting into some thick stuff on the way back and pigs started darting around. We could hear them but couldn't see. I only had the laser on my AR which was absolutely useless for vision. She's freaking out, pigs are crashing around, we pushed forward slowly and made it out and quickly walked back to camp to start a fire. We had to shoo some wild cows away from our spot and one broke one of my tent poles but whatever, it was working. We started a fire and ate and everything was a little better. So we turned in. I toss and turned, it was like 60 but the humidity and fog was so bad it was dripping off the roof of the tent. Soaking wet, cold, we were just trying to make it through. I woke up to the sound of a hurricane. Waves crashing ridiculously loud. I thought what this is, then I though the boat. I ran down there with no light, on the laser on my AR and the dim light of the moon through the fog. A big LNG ship had come down the channel and it pushes a wall of water that, when it gets to the shallows, curls up and crashes and drags trees. It's pretty violent. So I look, no boat, I'm in full panic now. I start shining the laser around hoping to bounce off something. It took about a minute and I hit the shiny reflective boat registration tag. It was well into the ship Chanel. I ditched my pants and gun and started swimming, at night, in the ship channel. I get to my boat, tangled in trees from the bow rope and half sunk. I got it back finally and it was about 5 is. Once there was enough light, I packed up the tent and we left. That was absolutely the worst night camping in my life. This came from my scout troop. The older boys had gone one high adventure, backpacking in Glacier Bay National Park. Since my troop was based in Illinois, they went by train as close as they could get and walked from there. As they were arriving in the national park and getting ready to go into the office to get everything set up, they see a truck collide with a couple on a motorcycle. They immediately get to work, performing first aid and calling 911. It takes pretty long for the ambulance to arrive. I don't remember how long exactly, I think somewhere in the realm of 30 minutes to an hour. The boys have the couple pretty much stabilized by the time the ambulance arrives. They literally saved those people's lives. As they were coming back to the area after a week of backpacking, the couple found them and thanked them. I and 2 mates went camping in one tent. I ended up drawing short straw and had to sleep in the middle. It was late summer and we all slept under a sheet and light blanket. I woke up early morning with sore arms, only thing I remembered was having a dream about skiing. My 2 mates were already up, went outside and told them about my dream. They said weird thing was I woke them up earlier jerking them both off. Still best friends to this day. 25. This month started in the 20s, which is nice in northern MN, so I planned a short winter camping trip conducted last week. Had to happen soon because if temps climb to the 30s, the snow starts melting and makes everything up here wet and cold as opposed to only cold. A friend, who had never been winter camping, found out and asked to come. Seemed like a great idea. Weather switched, cold front moved in over the days we planned to head out there was a projected -9 degrees low. It had me reconsider if I even wanted to go, but my friend was too excited for his first winter camping trip. I brought a couple backpacking stoves I like using on the trail in the summer, one gas and one alcohol to test out. By the time we had camp all set up, it was cold enough our lighters didn't want to work. Had to keep them in your pocket for a minute or two to warm up, and then you could light once or twice. Got one stove sort of working, but too difficult to figure it out while trying to stay warm. Normal campfire worked fine. Stayed warm in our different sleep systems rated for extreme temperatures, but packing up camp at -15 degrees to hike 3 miles back out was miserable. The cold and those simple 6 miles took more out of me than a week on a trail with some elevation to traverse.
Thanks for watching. Please comment, like, share and subscribe. The Internet Surfer on YouTube for more horror and scary stories.